Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CMU International Film Festival's live discussion event. We hope that you enjoyed your viewing of the Pittsburgh premiere of Sorry We Missed You. We're so happy that we were able to make our festival available to you virtually. My name is Brittany Zortman, and I will be moderating this Zoom session. Just as a reminder, tonight's discussion is being recorded, and by joining us, you are agreeing to let us both record your participation and include it in the recording of this event that we plan to make available on our festival's YouTube page and website. To ensure that this event functions as smoothly as possible, all of your microphones will be muted. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function. You will find this by clicking the Participants button on the bottom bar of your screen, where a white panel will appear. The raise hand button is on the bottom right of this panel. If you use the raise hand button, I will unmute your microphone when it's your turn to speak. To be clear, you must use the raise hand button on Zoom. Physical hand raising doesn't count in the internet realm. You can also write comments using the chat function that's available at the bottom bar of your screen. Please use this only when you want to respond urgently to something you've just heard. If you do this, I may opt to go to you even if you're not next in line. This is so that we can build our discussion around emerging issues rather than rapid jumps between topics that strict turn-taking often produces. Since we have so many people joining us tonight, please keep your thoughts, comments, and questions as concise as possible. Now, I want to hand things over to our discussion facilitator, Roger Rouse. Roger is a former professor and a longtime scholar of labor and family in contemporary capitalism. He will be guiding our discussion tonight. Roger?
Thank you, Brittany. Just one question. Do you have the record button pressed? Because on my screen, it's not pressed. So I just wanted to be doubly sure.
Yes, we're recording the session right now.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you, Brittany. And many thanks to all of you for braving the perils of Zoom to join us tonight. I'm sure you're keen to start talking about the film. So I'm just going to say 5 things, and I'm going to say them quickly. First, I wish I could thank by name everyone who's made the streaming of the film and tonight's discussion possible, but I can't. So I'm going to single out just a few individuals and groups. To begin with, there's the person you've just heard from, Brittany Zortman, and all of her fellow interns. Their names and bios are on the festival website, and I encourage you to take a look. Next, there's Vincent Shah, Assistant Dean of IT and Operations, CMU's Dietrich School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and all the IT magicians he has sent to the festival's way. Then there's Nancy Gerstmann, co-president and co-founder of Zeitgeist Films, the distributor in the United States of Sorry We Missed You, who has been an endlessly kind and helpful cooperator in enabling the festival to bring you the film we're about to discuss. And finally, of course, there's the incomparable Jolanta Lyon, who founded the CMU International Film Festival back in 2006 and is now directing its 14th and certainly most unusual incarnation. Without her, nothing about the festival is possible. With her, nothing seems impossible. So, given that we can't actually give people the audible applause they deserve, would you mind, if you haven't turned on your cameras, doing so right now so that we can shower them at least with the silent alternative, which I learned from Occupy, is this. So applause to all those people to whom we owe thanks. Thank you all very much. Second thing I want to say is that what follows tonight is meant to be a discussion, not a Q&A session. We'll do our best to answer questions if they arise, but our main goal is to help all of us enrich our thoughts about the film and the situation it portrays by sharing our ideas with one another. And I'll be working to try and enable people to share ideas as much as possible, and so will Brittany. The third thing is that this is a big experiment, and we're all cute but hapless guinea pigs on its wheels and in its mazes. As far as we know, no other movie theater or film festival has tried to combine a week-long virtual screening with a live but virtual discussion. So let's see what we learn, and please be kind, especially when things go wrong, as they probably will, especially given that I retired before life got Zoomed. So I'm really out on a limb here. Fourth, assuming we don't plunge into chaos right away, the next person you see on your screen will be our special guest, Lisa Frank. Lisa is the Executive Vice President for Strategic Campaigns at Service Employees International Union, SEIU, Healthcare, Pennsylvania. We're really grateful to her for bringing her considerable expertise to our discussion, and more generally for all the work she's been doing over the last 2 decades to improve the lives of home care workers, hospital workers, and everyone they help. Fifth and finally, because no good deed goes unpunished, I'm going to ask Lisa to get our discussion started by responding briefly to 2 very broad questions. As Lisa engages them, you might think about how you would respond to them as well. The first question is, what are the first things you'd like to say about the film? And the second is, in particular, how relevant do you think it is to what's happening today in the labor we do, in the places we call home, here in Pittsburgh and throughout the state? So let's welcome Lisa, please, with another great energetic round of hand waving. Lisa, it's all yours.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for coming. I'm actually really looking forward to this and to hearing what all of you have to say. And I'm going to mush those questions together, I think, a little bit, Roger. You know, the movie, I was so glad to have an opportunity to see it. It really resonated with me, I think, particularly here in the COVID moment. Home care workers and drivers were early deemed essential workers and were indeed essential workers, people who got seniors and people with disabilities out of bed or delivered meals and other necessities to folks who couldn't or shouldn't be out. And I think one of the really undertold stories of the COVID-19 moment is the intersection between the just-in-time economy and the inability of employers and government to respond with sufficient staff, with tests, with PPE. And I'd really love to talk about that a little bit if people want to. Just imagine doing Abby's job with no gloves, no gown, in the midst of a pandemic. There's a lot to talk about there. But I think we're all also starting to understand that the coronavirus is magnifying fissures in our economy and our society that well predate the pandemic. And I think Sorry We Missed You is important for opening up really pretty fundamental and important questions about work, like what is it and who is it for? And I think this is one of the most, what do I want to say, sets this in a pretty large frame. I think Ken Loach clearly wants us to set the experience of Abby and Ricky and Seb and Liza Jane against the economic and dislocations and neoliberal reforms of the 80s. There's that scene in which Molly, I'm sure you all saw it, who's the home care client who shows Abby her pictures from the 84-85 coal strikes. And Abby is trying to show her pictures as well, but she's also just sort of racing out the door because she has to get to her own, to the next client. And Molly sort of muses, you know, whatever happened to the 8-hour day? Nobody in this movie has enough time. I counted 17 separate times when a character said, I don't have time for that. I can't do that because I don't have time for that. I think that scene and those photographs really are a memory. And I think they're there to recall the brief mid-century accord between labor and capital that produced, at least for some workers, not for all workers, but for some, notably not healthcare workers like Abby, living wages, pensions, and maybe 8 hours for what we will. In the wake of that coal strike in 84 and 85, and here in the United States, I think how we kind of mark it be the air traffic controllers strike. Those arrangements where work took 8 hours and what you got for it was something that you might describe as livable, really came under concerted attack, and there began a decades-long shift that pushed the rewards of increased productivity, which we see a lot of in this film. People are doing a lot of work really fast. They're making a lot of money. Pushing the rewards of that, let's call those rewards money and freedom, up to the tippy top of the owning and managing classes, and a concomitant shift of risk and restriction down onto wage workers. So while back in the day, Abby's job might have looked much as Abby's job looks today, Ricky might have been, say, a postal employee. And we, the taxpayers, might have supplied him with that handheld thing that wound up costing him $1,000 when it got smashed. And there might have been some redundancy in his workforce so that a day off wouldn't have seemed impossible. But in the world of just-in-time self-employment, Ricky's on his own with his pain and his anger and his mounting debt. And I think that's why on the whole other end of the age and experience spectrum from Molly, we have Seb, who actually has an occupation that he finds pretty rewarding. And he can't understand why he would give up making graffiti with his friends for the kind of high-tech sharecropping that Ricky is stuck with. And I just want to say one thing about Seb and the other things that I think the film shows us. Because Seb's seriousness about his work and the joy that he takes in his work, I think is one of the many ways in which the film really resists the conclusion that work just sucks. A lot of the work we see in the movie sucks, but a lot of it doesn't. And Sorry We Missed You is full of all kinds of instances of people applying themselves, by which I just mean moving their muscles and their brains and their hearts and their hands to transform something, which is what work is. And sometimes what they create is joy and affection. Think of Ricky hauling a heavy box into the apartment of a man with a disability who couldn't get the box in himself for no reason other than it's a nice thing to do. Or Liza doing her deliveries with Ricky and that high five they give each other when they get the preciser on time. Or Seb, who actually asks to tend to his dad after he gets beaten up. Or Abby, whose work at home and work away from home are sometimes the hardest to distinguish, but gave everybody an unexpected evening of joy when they all pile in the van and go to Molly's. So what I'm hoping we can talk about a little bit here, and what makes the film relevant, especially in the COVID moment, is that it feels possible right now to have a real discussion about work in this country. And for me, the film is helpful in that because it brings some seriousness and some honesty to those really basic questions. What is work? Who is it for? Why should we do it? What do we need to get from it? And I really look forward to talking to all of you about that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So at this point, anyone who would like to chime in should do so. Just hit the raise hand button and Brittany will open your mic. I'm looking to see if anyone's done that yet. While we're waiting, I'll just say I thought those were incredibly helpful remarks, Lisa. Thank you. Hands are going up. Good. In my own work, I've found it helpful to distinguish between work, which we often associate with pay, and labor, which is, I think, what you were using the word work to cover. That is, this huge amounts of labor people do, only some of which we are encouraged to think of as work. And so we denigrate all the labor that isn't actually paid for by capital in pursuit of profit or by its agencies. Lots of hands going up. So Brittany, I think you know where to take us next.
Yeah, it looks like Mel Packer was the first one to have a point.
Hey, Mel.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was, well, to use a trite phrase, blown away by the film. And I was really blown away by the fact that in our world today, and too many people talk about trumping the existential threat to the humankind, when in fact, this movie showed very well that capitalism itself is an existential threat to humankind that brings horrors upon our lives, it brings horrors to our world. Yet at the same time, so many workers, including the workers in this film, don't see other alternatives. That they see that even after he's been beaten up and abused, that he still has to go to work. That she still saw, yes, it's okay, we'll sell the car so that you can go buy the truck because we have no choice in this world right now. There were not other alternatives offered. And that's unfortunate this time, and it's something we really need to change, and I think we can change, but I think that was pointed out very well in the film. I was stunned by the fact that it did not really have a conclusion because, in fact, there is no conclusion. We have to make that conclusion. That this film left it hanging, and it essentially said to us, it's up to you to change this, and I hope we take that up. Thank you.
I think we'll begin just by going with a few hands that are up, and then what Brittany and I will try and do is we'll monitor the chat section. So if people want to urgently pick up on something that's just been said, we may jump the queue. But Brittany, who's next?
It looks like Sridhar's next, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to give a little background, I'm a business school professor. Several of my MBA students work at Amazon. And so this movie is something that I think my students should see to see what their decisions affect, how they affect if they don't know how it affects. What surprised me were a couple things about the movie, that is happening in UK and not in the US. I thought there would be much more protection, or at least that's what we are made to believe, that somehow the Europeans have better protection. But what this surprised me is this made more of a US sense. There was no safety net really for these folks. I also thought the movie could have had a little bit more depth. I mean, there's the guy running the warehouse. Obviously, he wants to be the champion and is pushing the metrics down. What's his backstory? Why is this his calling in life? Is this how he's finding meaning? For his own self. I also thought the movie should have pushed a little harder against maybe what I considered a bad choice right in the beginning, with her selling the car, because she has a stable job, she has a car to go from place to place, and he has a dream, and he wants to get there, and to take somebody whose life was not perfect but somewhat stable, make that unstable so that this person's life could have a future. Again, I viewed that as an example of a bad decision that the couple unfortunately made, and then that got her life into the misery that that we saw. So I thought the movie showed some facts of life. But I was hoping for a man of twice palmed or that the movie would actually have a little bit more depth into several other characters. That's kind of where I thought.
Thank you. I should say I was British once, and unfortunately, the Britain I grew up with and benefited from enormously through its welfare state was assaulted almost as strongly by neoliberalism as the US. And it's no accident that the two Western countries with the highest COVID death rates are Britain and the US, precisely in part, at least, because they have so savagely undercut the safety nets that advantaged my generation so much, or at least those of us that were white and especially male. Who's next, Brittany?
It looks like Michael Goodhart here in the chat wanted to sort of piggyback off of Sridhar's point, so I'm going to unmute him.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I wasn't necessarily thinking I would necessarily say anything out loud, but I do think, picking up on the previous speaker's point, there is this interesting element of gender hierarchy in the relationship between Abby and Ricky, right? There's the sense that his job and his career aspirations are more important than hers. So, she makes the point, I can't sell my car. My people live all over the place. I'd have to take the bus from here to beyond, and it would take forever. And the next thing we see is he's driving around in this van that he's bought, right? So there's, it's understated, I think, but it's clearly there. And that's something we have to reckon with also, right? Because as Sridhar pointed out, that ends up being, contributing to a bad situation for the two of them. I mean, obviously, they're between a rock and a hard place in terms of his desire to figure out a way to earn his living and so on. But that gendered nature comes out clearly throughout, right? Her care work and the way in which her sort of the expectations on her as a woman, as a carer who is both employed to do this work, but who is also exploited by the fact that people can depend on her to sort of go beyond what the job strictly requires to treat people in a humane and decent way. So those gendered aspects of labor and the division of labor, I think, are also really an interesting aspect of the film.
Lisa, did you want to comment on that?
Oh, well, I just threw it in the chat. I mean, I guess I saw, unless home care workers in the UK make a hell of a lot more money than they do in the United States, there is no way for her to have a stable life if he's not working. There's just no way. And what I thought the story was trying to tell us about him was that he was just worn out. He had, been on work site, like you can't do construction past 44, you know, it's like he's got to get a new gig because your body can't do that forever. So I guess I saw that a little bit differently than you had seen it.
Okay. And I see Andrew and Dr. Jess have had their hand raised for a while, so I'm going to let them speak.
Sure. So thank you. As a young professional in the workforce, I think what I found most interesting with this film is seeing it as a son or as a child, and seeing your parents working those long hours. And I think the daughter really took on a parental role with taking care of their parents as they fell asleep in front of the TV, and to look after her brother. And I think that what I pulled away from it is really seeing how our work style and the duration that we're working at a particular company. As a younger professional, I might move companies every 5 years. And how is that narrative really portrayed within this? Because I know that even colleagues of mine have been at the job for 20, 30, or 40 years. And you don't see that within the workforce today. And so you might be working 2, 3 jobs, have a gig on the side, or a full-time job with a gig on the side. And so it's really, that's one thing that I pulled away, in how the daughter takes on a parental role to take care of her family.
Thank you. And I think Jane has an interesting point here in the chat about sort of the generational aspects. So I'm going to unmute you, Jane, if you'd like to make a point.
Hi. Yes. I'm one of the gig workers, as you would say. I had a lot of full-time jobs, and then through various reasons of raising my children, going back into the workforce, was encouraged to go into these kind of jobs, where the employers would say, oh, it's very flexible, oh, you know, you can choose your hours. And I remember watching that scene in the movie where the guy would say, oh, you know, you're your own boss, it's your own franchise, you do what you want. And then suddenly and this happened to me on a few of the jobs that I've been in since, where it's far worse than a corporate job, because what ends up happening is these gig kind of jobs are even more controlling. You know, you've got your little machine, you know, that watches you every 2 seconds. And I just thought it was, you know, people, I mean, you know, our generation don't really have a choice, because those are the only kind of jobs that are out there. You know, we're aged out of these, you know, 15 to 20 year jobs. And so we have to go back into these little controlling jobs, if you will, like the Amazon jobs, the Target jobs, the ones with the machines. And when I was watching, I kind of felt for the guy, because I remember a lot of my colleagues who I'm working with, you know, they would have issues with, you know, with pain, with injuries, and they literally were forced to work. They had no choice. What surprised me was, you know, I've been doing that here, and I remember the comment from earlier, I didn't realize this was going on in England. So this is kind of like, whoa, this is exactly the same thing that's going on there, which completely blows my mind. But yeah, I just think it's a very big issue right now, with a lot of 50 and up people who are aged out of their jobs, who can't find jobs in their industries. They can't open their own businesses for various reasons, and they're having to go into these jobs where they're controlled by these little machines that watch them every minute. And it's I don't know I don't know how we can resolve this, because it's a problem, because at our age, if they don't give them health benefits, and yet they have this pain, they don't have health benefits. It's rough. But I really felt when I watched that movie, it really kind of resonated with me, what everybody's going through here. And as I say, I was very surprised it's happening in England too. So yeah.
Who is next, Brittany?
It looks like Tracy raised their hand. There you go, Tracy.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I had this, I was going to reiterate, I had the same response, I finished my bachelor's degree in Britain many years ago, and I was surprised to see how much the social safety net had eroded. I mean, this movie really brought that home. And just what the last person was speaking, I am self-employed. I've been self-employed for almost 20 years. And this whole discussion about the gig economy, the work world has changed in so many ways, and this movie really shows some of that. But the gig economy throws everyone, that term is thrown around a lot, and I think we need to discuss what we mean when we're talking about that exactly, because they tend to put everyone that's from someone that's doing multiple jobs to someone that's self-employed and has multiple clients, and there's just, the world of work has changed fundamentally, and that's just, I just think that's an interesting discussion. And I don't know, it's just, to me, the social safety net is kind of that really matters in this environment. That was really, and I'm not expressing myself very well. The other scene where he goes, when he's in the accident, he goes to the urgent care. I'm thinking, at least he can go to urgent care. And at least it might be 3 hours, but he got an x-ray and he's getting help, and he has health care because he's in the UK. And we don't have that here. So there's a whole other element here with not even having access to that. And I know most people are probably thinking, oh my gosh, he has to wait 3 hours to get the result. And I'm thinking, at least he can go there and it's covered.
This sounds like excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say this is a good opportunity to bring Lisa back into the conversation a bit, I think. What was your reaction to the portrayal of the increasingly shredded national health system in Britain?
You know, what am I trying to say here? I was actually going to go back to something that you said, Roger, where you would like to make a distinction between work and labor. You know, I think it's useful to kind of untangle some of the things that at least can run together in my head. You know, people need income. And income doesn't have to be something that comes by way of an arrangement that you make with an owner, or something where, you know, your what once upon a time we called surplus labor would accrue to that person. You know, there are all kinds of arrangements. And it goes to your point, Tracy, about the social safety net. If you want to have a gig economy, okay, you know, you could marry that to universal basic income, and it would be a lot less grueling and disastrous and so pardon my French.
No.
Right. And so, you know, you want to try to kind of look at these things in relation to each other, because, you know, is there anything wrong with the gig economy per se? Maybe not. But if employment is your route to health insurance, as it is for many people, or if employment is your route to an income that you can survive on, or if finding someone who will buy your labor is your only route to living, then that job had better provide that living. And if it doesn't, then something else had better provide that living. And I think that's really the kind of, that's what we got to figure out in this society.
Yes, and thank you for expressing that better than I can. I think it's a really interesting concept, because the world of work has changed so much, but things have not changed in our system. So we have all these gaps, we don't have these things in place.
I'll just say one other thing. I think part of the reason we don't marry it to universal basic income is because it's very difficult to have the kind of profit margins that companies like to enjoy without some stick to get people into those work relationships. I mean, in this moment, because they've bumped up people's unemployment benefits, you know, you get that extra $600 a month. There are a lot of people who got laid off and furloughed who are now making more on unemployment than they made going to work. And, you know, it's a pretty rational calculation. Why the hell would I expose myself to COVID for less money? Right. And so, you know, that's when legislators start to think to themselves, well, maybe we should be reducing those benefits, or maybe you shouldn't get those benefits if you're not also applying for work, or all of the, you know, the whole kind of like labor regime that kicks into place. What would happen if we had universal basic income is a really interesting question. What kind of work would people do? What kind of labor would people engage? The one experiment that I've seen about that, actually shows that people rearrange their work and labor in really interesting ways. Like kids who are going to school stop working. That's probably a good thing. New dads don't go back to work so early. That's probably a good thing. In general, people don't just kind of lie around, but they may decide that they want to do something that they've never done before, like, I don't know, learn to teach kindergarten. So, you know, it's a kind of freedom that is difficult to imagine us experimenting with in the United States, given our attachment to really sort of addiction to, I don't know, on a spectrum from sort of like bonded labor to coerced labor. We live in that zone pretty much most of the time.
And we think in that zone completely, which is for all the people, like I said, people in my situation, it's just a really interesting space who have built businesses and built relationships and but everyone thinks as employer-employee, and they don't think about people that want to do more entrepreneurial things and build things that are different and more creative. Anyway.
Could I just chip in, if I may, with a couple of comments? One is picking up directly on what Lisa just said, that universal basic income could be very interesting as something to pursue, but I would suggest alongside universal healthcare. That those two go hand in hand. The other thing I was going to say, and I don't want to be too professorial about this for too long, but Tracy put her finger on something really important, which is that we use the word gig economy in a lot of different ways. And if we're trying to get a better hold on what the world of work is like and how it relates to labor and how those things relate to life and home and personal relationships, then I was thinking about this a little bit. I think there are at least 3 ways the term is used. I'll try and be very quick. One is in a very general sense, meaning that there's we're in an economy dominated increasingly by irregular and insecure work. People talk about this as precarity. Then more narrowly, there's the idea of people increasingly making money by doing gigs. That is a bit like Abby, where she may nominally be a wage employee, but she only gets paid by the visit. And Ricky only gets paid or gets money according to the deliveries that he makes. And then there's a slightly different, but also narrower sense, which is that their labor is regulated by the internet and mobile apps. And just one quick thing about how, going back to universal healthcare, it's one of the things that's certainly come up in Britain is that there are 3 categories of worker, according to the British government. There are employees, entitled to full benefits. There are workers who are entitled to minimal benefits. And then there are the self-employed who have to look after themselves. So firms in these areas are fighting hard to have everyone constitute themselves as self-employed. Unions are fighting to have them constituted as employers. But in the coronavirus crisis, if you're self-employed or even a worker, there is no, quote, duty of care from the company that is in practice employing you to provide you with the benefits that they may be contractually obliged to, or the state may contractually be obliged to give you as a, quote, employee. So I'll shut up for a while, but I hope those are of some help. Who's next?
Can I just throw, I see there, I only see one hand up, so I'll take the liberty to just throw this in. You know, because it's about healthcare, but it goes to the point about labor discipline and making sure that you know, you have control over the labor market if you need people working for you to generate profits. You know, when I first started to work in the labor movement, I bargained with General Electric. So General Electric, is, you know, is a big giant multinational firm, and it has a healthcare division. They make PET scanners and things like that, which they sell to hospitals. And being General Electric, they're not just going to sell you a PET scanner. They're going to teach you how to use it, keep it in operation. So as a hospital, your profit margin can go up and everybody's profit margins can go up. And in the particular year we were bargaining, they wanted workers to take an 11%, eat another 11% on their own health insurance, right? It was a lot. It was a lot of money, and workers were really upset about it. And our contention was that you guys are the people who are pushing up the price of healthcare, so you eat it, because they were pushing up the price of healthcare. And one day we went into bargaining. We're like, why don't you just get behind universal health care? You do deal with that in Sweden. Like, think of all the countries that General Electric works in. They work in, Denmark. They work in Germany, all of these places that have universal health care. And, we looked at their books, and their per capita cost per worker was half what it was in the United States. So why don't you just be rational? And they're like, no. And you want to know why? Because we like the control. It's really useful to us to have people afraid that they won't be able to get health care. And, we just view that as an investment. Just said it. So I just think it's important to remember, that this is a capitalist economy, and labor is not always, free labor.
All right, I see Sridhar has had his hand up for a while, so I'm going to let him speak.
Yeah, it's nice to hear this discussion. I'm a business school professor, and I was a software entrepreneur, so I am the evil, kind of the person in most of these movies. And I was born in a very poor country and so on. So I've had an opportunity to see, from the minus infinities of the world. Slumdog Millionaire is not actually fiction. To where many of us live today. The answer, I think, has always eluded us, because things like universal basic income, maybe only Norway could afford it, or Saudi Arabia could afford it, because they have these natural resources, and even now they can't afford it, right? And to some extent, having the welfare and having Medicare, Medicaid was supposed to provide some kind of a benefit. Maybe it's not providing as much benefit. So then it comes back to what is the operationalizability of some of these things, right? Whether it be universal basic income or a basic $600 a month, regardless. And it doesn't matter whether you go to work or not. That we are a civilization, and if you want to just do nothing and dream about something, it's still okay. It's okay. Not everybody needs to be, a Calvinist working for God, right? And so, the question then becomes: is it affordable? And as a society, do we simply say it's perfectly all right if people want to dream about things to do and never do anything? And we have not had a good answer to this, right? And unfortunately, what has happened, in my view, is capital has continued to chip away and keep winning, and the bargaining power of labor has just gone worse and worse. And I would have thought through Obama years and things of that type, things would have gotten better, actually, that the labor would have more bargaining power and things of that type. And it just surprised me that through all of that, it's just gotten more and more chipped away. I also think there's a little bit of, I'll call it brainwashing that happens right through the entire system here, which is, hey, it's about you being your own boss. You can be, don't have to work for anybody. You are a self-made man, and right? And some of that you see in the movie too, where people are hoodwinked into believing kind of the self-ownership story without understanding the risks that are involved, the fluctuation, all the hidden costs they are bearing that they are not aware of until it happens, right? And you see that in the movie. I mean, because I know this world, I'm looking at this guy and thinking, my God, this is not going to work out well for him. I don't need to see this movie. But I think it is the upbringing here of everybody, kind of believing that this will work out, when it's a very, very difficult way to make a living, actually. So I don't know how we can give that bargaining power back to the labor, other than saying it has to be a combination, as I said, of minimum payment period forever, regardless. Just do it. It's called civilization.
All right, I think Michael had a point to go off of sort of the argument about affordability of UBI. So if Michael Goodhart, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I've written some on basic income and have been studying it for a long time. And this issue about whether it's affordable has been a thing that's certainly been debated. And economists will go back and forth, and there's different ways. But the point I was interested in, what's affordable is always relative, and it's a question of our values rather than of some strict economic calculation, right? So we can suddenly afford, as I wrote in the chat, trillions in bailouts on top of a multi-trillion dollar tax cut for the rich, on top of $1 trillion military budget. That money would go a hell of a long way toward paying for universal basic income and healthcare. So when we think about what's affordable, what we're really asking about, what are we? And this was the point that Sridhar got onto at the end of his comment, precisely, like, what kind of society do we want to have, right? Do we just think that decency requires that we take care of people in a certain kind of way? And if we do, we need to change our priorities and make sure that our economy reflects our values. But presently, our economy reflects the values of the very few people who benefit enormously from it, and that's deeply problematic.
I don't see any hands up. So can I throw out a question? I'm now seeing a couple of comments coming up from Andrew and Edith, so I will be very brief. But before I hopefully will go on quite a bit longer if people are willing to do that. But I think it would be good at some point to talk about what we think of this as a piece of filmmaking. In other words, not just what we think about the world that it's portraying and how the world in Britain relates to the world in the United States and elsewhere, but also what methods Loach and his screenwriter Paul Laverty and the others who worked on the film have used to get across their attempt to have us focus more carefully on the lives of people like Ricky Abbey, Seb, and Lisa Jane. Any thoughts about this as a piece of filmmaking?
I do see that Marta a while ago had commented that she had something to address about Ken Loach as a filmmaker. So Marta, if you want to speak about that.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Roger. Yes, I have a couple of comments now. They started accruing as we were discussing things. So I'm not participating in the gig economy unless you consider being a university professor a gig, which it might be in the future. I don't know. But yes, speaking of Ken Loach, I used to confuse him with Mike Lee for some reason, and then I googled all the movies that he's made and checked some of them off of my list, and I think there's a very subtle difference in the filmmaking of Loach and Lee. When you think of Bread and Roses, for example, or A Fond Kiss, like his movie making is so completely stripped of special effects, compared to Mike Lee, I would say, for example. And also the presence of hope in that movie. I don't know if this is something you guys or anyone has thought about. Is there any hope portrayed in that movie? Because when you look at that family objectively, it's a perfectly beautiful family where there is love, where the mother is just an amazing caretaker and connector of these, like she connects everyone in that family. And then the daughter is amazing. I mean, she's smart, she's caring. Yes, she takes those keys in the end, which kind of causes an avalanche. But and the son is an artist, a wonderful artist, so that's some of the points that I've been thinking. Also, this movie made me think of an obscure movie probably no one has seen apart from myself years ago when I was living in Berlin. It's a movie called Struggle, about a single mother who accepts all kinds of gigs to pay to pay her bills and to provide for her child, but she ends up either, I can't quite remember, it was 20 years ago, she ends up either in a brothel, or she ends up marrying a wealthy guy, one of these two bleak options, I guess. And then another thing I wanted to address, sorry to be like dumping all of this on you, but I just got excited about a couple of things. Another thing I was thinking about, wondering about when I was watching this movie, and as you can see, I have several takeaways after watching it, was the tension between the father and the son. It's not just the usual tension between the father and the son, you know, the son growing up and trying to assert his own autonomy and be his own person. But I was wondering if the tension is also because the father partakes in the gig economy and the son wants to partake in the identity economy. So he wants a different job. He doesn't just want a job. He wants something that will define him and, you know, will represent his identity. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Andrew and Dr. Jess, did you want to put in anything about the filmmaking aspect?
Sure. I think that I can really comment towards how the filmmaker like welcomes us into the home of the family and seeing it from a very natural perspective. I think that it was slow to start out for the introduction of the family. Personally, I thought that the first couple scenes were kind of dry whenever they were introducing the family to us. But as it started to see the different dynamics within the family, I think that it really offered a very organic approach to how we are reorienting kind of the way that we see the stereotypical family. And it has a really nice reflection on how families operate today.
If I could pick up on, is it Maria's point? One way of thinking about the film as a piece of filmmaking is to think how it's structured. And I have two related thoughts here. One goes back to the very first thing Sridhar was saying. That is, the first voice we hear is that of Maloney, who is giving us, literally and metaphorically, the company line. And it's not perhaps accidental that Maloney is just one syllable away from baloney. But the whole film, in a way, is a deconstruction of what he says. Whether one finds it convincing or not is another issue. But it's also, in some ways, I think, both representative of Loach's work and also unusual. I was saying to Lisa before we began that, for better or worse, this may be an admission or a claim to fame, I think I've seen almost every film Loach has made. I saw his first work for British television when I was 14, 15 years old, followed him ever since. In most of his films, there is a fair amount of what Raymond Williams called resources for hope. He shows us with working people helping one another out. He shows us them doing that in personal lives, but also maybe through the medium of a union or other kind of collective political action. He also has fairly significant dollops of humor. This film, to my mind, and you may disagree, has much less of either of those things. That it's structured much more like a descent into hell. It's not only showing us the controversial nature of the claims made by Maloney, but also the cost of those claims being untrue. And I'm very interested politically in what it means to end with continual decline. It goes back to what Mel said too, about ending without a conclusion. What do people think about that idea about how things are structured, whether this was the best way to get across what Loach is clearly trying to do, which is encourage people to do something about this kind of situation?
I think Meghana has a sort of related point about the status of this film as a tragic piece. So I'm going to let her speak if she's comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking along those similar lines because when I first looked up this film before watching, I mean, the summary was said the word tragic. And so throughout the movie, I always associated tragedy with death. And so I was waiting for something like that to happen for some reason, and then it didn't happen, and it ended almost like there was some kind of physical alteration at the end, but it just ended. And I think what felt tragic and what, like, the downhill that you're talking about is how fragile things are in such small ways. I mean, losing his key for a day throws everything into chaos. I think somebody used the word hell, like, and I think it's just incredible how the director is able to use these really small, ordinary problems and see how they just erupt and take over everything. And in a way, it's almost more effective than something like death or something really dramatic and tragic, because it's something that we can associate with any family. And I think that was very powerful.
Thank you.
It's a tough one, right? I mean, and to that point, there's all kinds of measures of this. How many paychecks are people away from not being able to eat, or how many, what kind of medical bill is just going to put you under, or whatever. I mean, there is, to your point, Magana, is that how you say it? Megana? There is a tremendous amount of fragility. It's one in the kind of redistribution of rewards of productivity and the pains of productivity. That is one of the things that's been redistributed. There's more resilience at the top and less resilience at the bottom. And it is simply the case that it happens in home care all the time. Somebody doesn't get paid enough, or somebody has to buy something extra because someone in their family, or then they can't put gas in the car, then their client doesn't get out of bed because they can't get to the client's house. I mean, the cascade of catastrophe that happens with the smallest little mishap in these systems is alarming. It's alarming, and it's one of the things that we see all over the place because of COVID, which just puts additional pressure on that. And I think one of the things that is that everybody in the labor movement racks their brains around is, in these gig economy, or everybody's self-employed or whatever. Like, you think about the number of people who are working today who are not covered by labor law, right? Because labor law envisions the unionization largely of factory workers. Its mechanisms for people joining the union require a workplace. You can't form the union if you don't know who your coworkers are. How do home care workers form the union? How do look at Ricky's work site? How much time does he have to talk to his coworkers before that boss comes in? How will they do it? And I'm trying to answer your question, Roger. I really am working my way back around to that. But it's domestic workers, that includes home care workers, not covered by labor law. Healthcare workers healthcare workers, even in facilities, were not covered by labor law until the late 60s and early 70s. Farm workers, right, had only recently covered by labor law. And gig workers, not at all. You see the fight that's happening in California. Do they even have an employer? Well, if they don't have an employer, they can't form the union, right? So part of the fight that people are having when Roger is talking about the healthcare system in the UK, part of that fight is who has to foot the bill for that healthcare, but part of that fight is whether or not those workers can have the union. And unless you shift power in this situation, it's very difficult to think about how you might shift outcomes. So I felt that challenge at the end of the movie. I felt that challenge because it's not just like, okay, this kind of is not really so great, but it is, I think, a burning question for the labor movement today. What are the arrangements? What are the kinds of governmental power we have to seize, or just straight up worker power? Like, we're just not going to work till somebody fixes this stuff. But you have to imagine resistance on a scale that we really haven't seen in a long time. And that's hard. It's harder than it's been. And that's deliberate. I mean, that's not an accident. That's by design.
Given that we've got two people wanting to talk, who've talked before, but one of them's only talked once before. Could I suggest we do Tracy first, and then to Sridhar next, if that's okay?
Sure. And we are coming up to an hour of this discussion, but it seems like a lot of us still have a lot of points to make. So if it's okay with everyone, I think we should go on a little bit longer. This has been a really engaging discussion. But yes, Tracy, I'm going to unmute you.
And I'm happy to let someone else speak. I don't want to dominate. I'm finding, yeah. So there were just some interesting discussions. I think was Lisa was just saying. I'm sorry if I got the names wrong. That whole labor, the whole points that you were just making. I mean, this movie really points. Well, I was struck by. So I was really surprised to learn that the self-employed in Britain are not automatically covered by all the other benefits. I assumed that you could be self-employed in the UK, unlike here, and still have access to all the health. I'm just learning that in this discussion. I assume you would still have access to healthcare and everything in the same way because they have universal healthcare. So that was really stunning to me that they sort of separate out the self-employed from people that are like workers. And so maybe I was misinterpreting that scene. So maybe that needs to be explained to me, that maybe they weren't just able to go in and get him the care that he needed. Maybe that was complicated by his employment. But that whole this labor work division is fascinating to me. And I would love to have more discussions about that, because I think it was Lisa brought up what's going on in California with AB5 and the PRO Act. And those are hugely problematic for anyone that actually sincerely wants to be self-employed, because they envision, as I am, they envision a world in which it's workers and it's corporations and workers, and that's it. And you must belong to a union. Like no one is envisioning a structure in which people have access. So like you have UBI and you have healthcare and you have the social safety that you need. You have the freedom to do all these things you want, but we're still thinking in terms of 50 years ago, where it's everybody against like a big corporation. You're either a worker, but there is no mindset where you have this sort of more freedom to sort of design your own, business, really, truly, which is what I and a lot of other people have. And so it's just, I struggle with this because it's like we don't have the language to discuss this, and there are decisions being made and fights being fought that just don't make sense because we don't understand how complicated the economy has actually become and what work and labor really look like now and what we really need culturally to talk about. Sorry.
Don't apologize. That, I think, is a really vital point.
I see Cheryl has a really unique perspective.
A lot of scholars who look at this in Britain and the US. Brittany.
Yeah, I'd like to let Cheryl speak, because she's sort of we've been talking a lot about healthcare and workers' rights, but we haven't really touched on childcare or education yet. So Cheryl, if you would like to put your insight.
Just actually what I said in my chat. After spending over 30 years in the public school system as a school social worker and counselor, I feel like I've seen it all. And there are so many situations, starting back when I entered the field in the late 60s, all the way up until my retirement 20 years ago. The situations exist that there are parents who can't come to the school to sit down with the team at the school to work out a student's misbehavior, truancy, and well, some of my best friends are teachers, and I have an enormous amount of respect for teachers. I did find, however, that there were times when I had to take it upon myself to try to help a teacher understand what makes a parent unable to drop everything and come to the school. And I don't have an answer. I wish I did have an answer, but I have had many meetings with parents, who worked at the deli at the Giant Eagle, and I would be doing my shopping and would chat with this mother who couldn't come to the school. And education is so important. And
you
yet
direct
we
people?
can't,
I'm sorry.
you know, parents like the ones we saw in the movie, how much can we expect of them how much can we educators expect of them?
Forgive me for interrupting. I was just going to ask you, would you think that this movie would be something you would direct people towards as a way of answering that question? The way of helping people understand why some parents can't come to the school?
I definitely think that it would be a valuable tool, yes.
I think we have enough time to take one more comment, and I'm going to take Jimena's because she hasn't spoken yet. And Jimena has been helping us. She is one of the interns here at the festival, so I'm going to unmute her.
Thank you, Brittany.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here with my sister, and we have one comment about the gig economy.
Well, we saw the movie, and well, if the legislation when allows this figure in the economy as a self-employed person, it seems that our politicians didn't go all the way through, because when things go wrong like this, like it is happening right now, a self-employed person cannot be in line to ask for, to file for unemployment. But there is no line for them also to file for bankruptcy. Where is the Chapter 11 for self-employed people? So for me, that is one of the concerns, that there is no a holistic legislation for this kind of people in our economy.
Thank you. Should we begin wrapping up, do you think, Brittany?
Yes.
Okay. Forgive me for not coming back to you, but I think Brittany's probably right that we should let people get on with the rest of their lives. Thank you very much to Lisa. So first, before I say anything, I'd like to give her the chance for a few wrap-up comments, and then I'll maybe say a few words after that, knowing me more, a few words. But Lisa, what would you like to say?
I'll unmute. I mostly thank you. I don't know that I would have tripped over this movie by myself if you all hadn't put it on in Pittsburgh and put it right under my nose. And it's, I think it's something that I will figure out how to show to other people. I think it's something that I will figure out how to show to workers. One of the things that, I've learned as an organizer is that even when workers are really struggling and not making a ton of progress in their efforts to change their situation at work and therefore to change their situation at home, that learning and kind of adults don't get a lot of adult education, or a lot of adults don't get a lot of adult education. Unions is one of the places where adults do get some adult education, and being able to interpret what's happening and to get resources for that interpretation and to be brought on kind of on the inside of understanding instead of always the last person to be told what's happening is really a valuable thing that grown-ups do, is to talk and think and learn. And so I'm really appreciative of doing that with all of you, and to be able to take this resource and do it with some home care workers and some nursing home workers and some hospital workers who I know will find it provocative and meaningful and challenging in the ways that we did. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Brittany. Thanks to all of you for making this such a great event. As with my opening remarks, I'm going to try and say 5 things, and I'm going to try and
Did we lose Roger? Is he frozen for everyone else?
Frozen, yeah.
Oh no. Well, I will say part of my conclusion while we wait for Roger to rejoin us. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining our event. I think this was a great success, and I think we had a really engaging and important conversation. Please be checking your emails within the next few days, because we're going to be sending out an exit survey, and this will help us improve upon future events if we decide to do more virtual events. And we hope that you all enjoyed the chance to connect with one another and to discuss the important issues that this film raises. And it looks like we did lose Roger. So maybe I'll have his closing remarks emailed to you all. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you enjoyed our live discussion events. Thank you.
Thank you.